To save a ruined empire, one man thought he had to become its greatest monster. His was an empire marked by simmering discontent. In Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, formidable provincial governors known as satraps were ruling as petty kings. They had grown bold, raising their own mercenary armies and challenging the throne. In this satraps' revolt, local leaders lived with near total autonomy, creating their own small kingdoms and draining the imperial coffers. In doing so, they formed their own alliances, waged their own wars, and literally ignored what a distant and aging king decreed. And this wasn't mere insubordination. The western frontier was going up in flames. The richest province of the empire, Egypt, also had torn itself from the empire 60 or so years earlier. It emerged as a fiercely independent kingdom. This was no mere loss of territory. This was a crushing blow to Persian hegemony and prestige and the Persian economy. The grain and gold of the Nile Valley did not flow from the wealth into the treasury any more. Even worse, this independent Egypt was behaving just like a cancer, with its very existence as a cancer, funding and inciting revolts across the whole Mediterranean coast directly up and down it. At court, things were even uglier. The aging Artaxerxes Roman II had more than 100 sons from his many wives and concubines, and succession was a bloody free for all. Seemingly impatient, the designated heir, Darius, set about assassinating his father. Upon discovery of the plot, Darius was executed. Then Ariasps the Lion got duped into thinking his father was angry with him. He himself committed suicide. Another ambitious half-brother killed a third son, Arsames. The royal house was grinding its own flesh into paste in a frenzy of paranoia and ambition. This was the world from which our story's central character emerged. He was Archas, one of the king's last legitimate sons still standing. He had watched this decay, this weakness, this continuous cycle of rebellion and backstabbing, and when eventually his father, the exhausted Artaxerxes Roman II, died somewhere in 359 to 358 B.C., Archas knew if he wasn't going to give in, he hadn't got it right. The empire was almost in ruins. To save it, he would not have ever been a benevolent ruler. He would function as a vehicle of pure and undiluted terror. The first act of Archas as new king of kings, to take the throne as Artaxerxes Roman III, was not issuing edicts or receiving dignitaries. It was an act of chilling, systemic brutality meant to cut the dynasty's wounds permanently. He realized the weakness of his father's rule derived from the looming danger of internal rivalries. For him, solution was simple and certain: get rid of every single one of them. He started a purge of the royal family that stunned even the hardened Persian aristocracy. One after another, those few remaining brothers, uncles, and cousins were rounded up and executed. According to Roman historian Curtius Rufus, 80 male relatives were murdered in a single day, their bodies discovered in a courtyard to give them a dire warning. Artaxerxes buried alive his own sister, and methodically killed the sons of any opponents. By the time the red mist melted, the Achaemenid dynasty was exhausted, but Artaxerxes Roman III had been left on his own, his seat on the podium absolutely, fearfully inviolable. There would be no long succession crises under his presidencies, for there was next to no one to succeed him. With his home front set by slaughter, Artaxerxes began to work the empire's lingering grievances, the rebellious satraps. On his ascension, Artaxerxes made an infamous decree that sent shock waves through the provinces. Everyone ordered all satraps to promptly disband their mercenary units. This was a frontal assault on their authority, a proclamation that their time of semi-independence was over. It also naturally provoked resistance. The most powerful of the rebels still living, Artabazus of Phrygia, openly challenged the king, but Artaxerxes was not his father. He was relentless. He sent loyalist armies, perhaps more importantly of all, employed the vast scale of Persian gold. Threatening Athens with the full force of the Persian fleet, he forced Athens to abandon Artabazus. Scavenged of allies and relentlessly hunted, Artabazus ultimately dropped out and fled, seeking refuge at the court of Philip Roman, II of Macedon, detail that would prove very important later. One by one, the other rebellious governors were subdued, either physically or through the sheer terror his reputation engendered. Artaxerxes Roman III conveyed a blunt, brutal message. The authority of the King of Kings was absolute. He'd sifted his way through the blood of his own relatives to attain that throne, and he wasn't afraid to drown any rebel serving in a sea of their own. It was power that flowed from the center, not the power of reform or discussion, but power that was brute and unmitigated fear. Now he could focus on the grand prize of all, the lost jewel in the imperial crown, Egypt. The final goal of Artaxerxes Roman III was to restore the empire, and that meant one thing: reconquering Egypt. For 60 years the land of the pharaohs had flouted Persian rule. Artaxerxes Roman III also conducted his initial significant campaign to reinstate it in 351 BC. He led an army of thousands into the Nile Delta, anticipating rapid victory. He was met with disaster. The pharaoh, Nectanebo Roman II, was not only a competent commander, but had with him elite Greek mercenaries of his own. The Persian invasion ground to a halt in the complicated rivers of the Delta, and Nectanebo delivered a devastating defeat. The fearsome tyrant Artaxerxes was driven into a humiliating retreat. The King of Kings had failed, and the news spread like wildfire. If Artaxerxes could be defeated, perhaps his control wasn't so iron. Rebellions broke out throughout the Western Empire. The heart of the new revolt resided in the wealthy port city of Sidon, Phoenicia. With the Persian defeat emboldened, the king of Sidon, Tens, routed the imperial garrison and hired his own mercenaries, some and even brought in his Egyptian allies to assist him. The Persian reaction at first came up short, but Artaxerxes was one who learned from his mistakes. If not final, it was merely a preparation for a more staggering triumph. For several years he went into painstakingly preparing his revenge. He gathered an army of extraordinary scale, ancient sources estimated at more than 300,000 men, and recruited his own elite Greek ranks in 345 B.C. He drove this fearsome power to Sidon. The city was fortified, but walls wouldn't defeat Artaxerxes. He would have it from the inside out. The Persian army was encircling Sidon. King Tens was terrified. In a truly high treason and treachery, he connived in secret with Artaxerxes in order to stay alive. He gave the Persian king 100 of Sidon's most noble citizens. Artaxerxes had them all executed. Then Tens let his turncoat mercenary general, Mentor of Rhodes, open the city gates. The inhabitants of Sidon recognized they had been betrayed, and that they would undergo some torment from the notoriously merciless king. And so they made one more great, desperate decision. They blocked the gates inward, trapping themselves and lighting a fire in their own city. As historian Diodorus Siculus records, 40,000 people perished in the flames. In cold dispassion, Artaxerxes was said to have sold the rubble of the burning city down as a high price, because it was covered with melted gold and silver. A horrific fate of Sidon drew the eyes of the rest of Phoenicia and Cyprus, who soon surrendered. Now nothing got in his way. In 343 B.C., Artaxerxes had his second invasion of Egypt. There would be no mistakes this time. His powerful army, made up of 3 big divisions, destroyed Nectanebo Roman II's men. Realizing that he had lost his cause, the pharaoh collected as much treasure as he could and fled south into exile. It was 60 years at that, and Egypt finally was once again a Persian province. Artaxerxes' revenge was as brutal as it gets. His walls and the most essential cities were razed, and Egyptian temples plundered one after another with routine efficiency. Greek sources add a final, symbolic touch of cruelty. They argue that Artaxerxes personally slaughtered the sacred Apis bull, a living god to Egyptians. He even had it served as a banquet to his men. Modern historians are doubtful of this detail, but the very existence of the story illustrates how well known a monster he may have been. He did not want merely to conquer Egypt, he wanted it humiliated. Artaxerxes Roman III came back to his capital as the undisputed master of the largest empire on earth. He had accomplished something his father never could. He had destroyed his family, subdued his nobility, and retaken Egypt, the Achaemenid Empire was reborn, stronger and more centralized than it had been in 100 years. At the top of the power ladder was a ruler so fearful to check the rising strength of yet another threat in the Western world, Philip Roman II of Macedon. In his court one man stood ahead of all others, a powerful eunuch named Bagoas. Bagoas was the king's vizier or chief minister. Because they could not have children themselves, eunuchs were frequently trusted in the Persian court with substantial power. They had no alternative dynasty. Bagoas was a crucial commander in the vicious retaking of Egypt. He became Chiliarch later in life, which is translated as Grand Vizier, making him the second most powerful man in the empire. He was the king's trusted confidant, his chief administrator, his most dependable servant. But Bagoas had become fabulously rich, and had begun to use his power. As the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus notes, he began to fear the cruel and mercurial king he served. Perhaps Artaxerxes was growing tired of his powerful vizier. Bagoas decided he was not content to sit out until he was removed. The man who had assisted the tyrant in reasserting his power over an empire chose to destroy it. Bagoas had made his move in 338 BC. Through the king's own physician, the vizier orchestrated the assassination of his master. Artaxerxes Roman III, the butcher of his own family, the destroyer of Sidon, the conqueror of Egypt, did not die on a battlefield but in his own chamber, succumbing to a dose of poison given by the one man he believed could be trusted. This dramatic account of poisoning comes almost exclusively from Greek sources, after all, who loved tales of palace intrigue. A Babylonian cuneiform tablet from the period of Artaxerxes suggests that perhaps Artaxerxes Roman III died of natural causes. But whether by poison or illness, the result was the same. The death of the strong, terrifying king at this crucial time created a power vacuum that sent the newly stabilized empire directly back into chaos. In order to cement his grip over the total puppet master status, Bagoas also had all of the king's older sons killed, excluding only the youngest boy, now called Arses. Bagoas's plan was diabolical. He would install the young and inexperienced Arses on the throne as King Artaxerxes Roman IV. The boy would be a puppet, and Bagoas would be the true ruler of the Persian Empire. For 2 years the plan worked, but Bagoas was making a grave mistake. He underestimated the ambition within the Achaemenid blood. Arses started to resent his position, and began plotting to sack his overbearing vizier. Bagoas, a consummate courtly schemer, found out once again he acted first. Bagoas had the young king and all his children assassinated in 336 BC. The puppet tried to cut his strings, so the puppet master just threw him into the fire. When Bagoas needed a new puppet, he turned to a distant cousin of the royal family he knew, Codomanus. Bagoas presented him with the throne, believing that this outsider would be thankful and manageable. It was Darius Roman III who became king as Codomanus, but Bagoas had made his last fatal error. Darius Roman III was no idiotic youth. He was an elder nobleman and soldier with no plans on being used as a pawn by anyone else. He understood that while Bagoas was alive, his life was on the line. As it is told in the history, when Bagoas discovered that he couldn't control this new king, he made a third cup of poison. But this time Darius also had an alert. In a glorious irony, when he was presented with the poisoned chalice by Bagoas, Darius ordered his loyal vizier to drink it instead. Cornered, Bagoas was made to drink the poison he had created for his king, and hence the treacherous kingmaker was killed by his own favorite weapon. Darius Roman III was thus the sole ruler of the Persian Empire. But what an empire he inherited! The bloody purges of Artaxerxes Roman III and the assassinations planned by Bagoas had weakened the dynasty and the court. The terror that bound the empire was gone, and instability replaced it. In 336 BC, another year on the other side of the Aegean Sea, King Philip Roman II of Macedon was assassinated. His son, a brilliant and impossibly ambitious 20-year-old named Alexander, became king. The moment was now for one of the most consequential collisions in history. A weakened, unstable Persian Empire was about to meet the greatest military genius the world had ever known. The reign of Artaxerxes Roman III represents an example of ruthless efficiency. He was an unforgiving and barbaric tyrant who took his throne by murder and secured it by slaughtering his own kin, but his methods worked for 20 years. He halted the forces tearing apart the Persian Empire, restoring central authority, and recapturing the province of Egypt that was vital as well to the Persian Empire, recharging the treasury of the empire. He gave the dying Achaemenid dynasty a violent, bloody, ultimately temporary revival. But the terrible irony was that the tool he used in building his power, ruthless betrayal, is what ultimately brought him down. The person who trusted no one put his trust only in one confidant, Bagoas, who took advantage of that trust in order to kill him and his successors. The chaos after he was killed was the last nail in the coffin of Achaemenid civilization. The puppet asses brought about an unhappy and destructive time, and then Darius Roman III was just the very moment Alexander was setting in and gathering his army. The tyrant's reign of terror had postponed the fall of Persia. His assassination ensured it. He had saved the empire from itself, but left it ready to be attacked by the enemy, illustrating the powerlessness and fragility of an empire built only on fear, as is the life of a man who motivates it. If you liked the premise, ambition, power, and betrayal, just click subscribe and the notification bell so you don't lose our next episodes of some of the most dramatic and bizarre stories of ancient history. And if you think anything is to be gained through Artaxerxes Roman III's brutal legacy, leave it down.